This bog has been in my family in excess of 100 years. I'm not sure whether my great-grandfather, Seth Collins, who was a whaling captain, built it or acquired it or what, but anyway, it's been in operation for that period of time and has stayed in the family.
This bog here was built in 1880 by my great-grandfather, Asa Jenkins, Civil War veteran, and also came home from the sea. He was a whaler. And it's been in continuous production since.
When I got out of high school, I started working in the mill, in the sawmill in the wintertime, and on the bogs the rest of the year, and the outdoor life really agreed with me. And even though I'm very thin, at 70, I'm in pretty darn good shape, and primarily for 3 reasons. I did a lot of hard work, and I enjoyed doing it. I put a lot of fresh air in my lungs, and I drank a lot of cranberry juice and ate a lot of cranberry sauce. And I think the combination is why I'm in such good health right now.
Cranberries, native to North America, had been a popular New England fruit even before the early settlers began to arrive. To the Indians of the area, the berry was known as sasaminesh and was useful in the making of pemmican, a dried cake of mashed venison, fat, and berries. The early settlers began to find new uses for the fruit, and the first written recipe for cranberry sauce dates back to 1693. The eventual cultivation of the cranberry as a crop did not really begin until the early 19th century, when Henry Hall of Dennis discovered how sand could affect the vines.
The record shows that Captain Henry Hall in Dennis built the first bog in 1816. And he built it as he did because he owned the patch of wild vines while the sand dune was nearby. And as the sand blew over the runners, he observed he had the biggest berries, more of them than anybody else. That was nature's way of replenishing itself, wasn't it?
Cultivated in a mixture of sand and peat, cranberry bogs were developed to accommodate the berries, which grow off of a low-running vine. Harvested in the fall, each bog must have an ample water supply close by for flooding and irrigation. In the winter months, the bog remains flooded to protect its roots from freezing. Each stage of the growing season is reflected in the changing colors of the bogs. In the late spring, light pink flowers come into bloom.
The petals, as it opens, twist back and leave that bill out there. It's the flower part that sort of resembles a crane, and some think that's where the name cranberry came from.
The cultivation of cranberries grew to be a widespread activity in Massachusetts, but primarily on Cape Cod, where the acidic soil combines with a mild climate to provide a good growing season. Early on, the cranberry earned its reputation as a healthy addition to the diet.
And then as the settlers became more and more seaworthy and went into the whaling industry and the fishing industries, the men came home very often and were terribly, terribly ill with scurvy and other diseases. And they found that if they kept a barrel of cranberries in water, in a barrel, on the ship, and doled this out to the men every day, that they would come home with no diseases. And of course, we know, as I said before, that the vitamin C is what, in the cranberry, that's what kept them well.
Abel D. Makepeace, I think, was the first of the big-time, well, cranberry operators commercially. He was not the originator of the business, but he developed it at an early stage, about 100 years ago now.
By the mid-1800s, there was a great amount of cranberry farming. Abel D. Makepeace brought together more than 75 of the leading growers to Sandwich Town Hall on July 10, 1888, to form the first meeting of the current Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association.
The growers were more or less at the mercy of people in the cities that were selling their crop. In other words, they would ship the berries down to a wholesale house, and then after a while maybe they'd get a check, and maybe they wouldn't. And so one of the ideas was to form this association, not to sell their crop, but to have the clout or the togetherness to form their own destiny, if you will.
In those days, it was a simple life. It was the horse and buggy days. The shovel, the pick, the grub hoe. They did it with wheelbarrow and hand labor entirely. So the progress in our industry modernizing didn't take place up to World War I. They did pretty much the same in 1918 that they did in 1887.
They had line reels around the bog full of string. And what they would do is insert a stake about 5 foot apart and then wrap the string around there. And then they would designate 2 people to get inside those string lines there, and they'd give them a 6-quart measure up there, and they would have to pick the berries by hand. Once they'd filled up their 6-quart measure, they would take it over to Sally the tally girl over here, and then they would dump their berries into the barrel, and they would continue on picking. And Sally the tally girl would give them a ticket or token, and depending on how many they got, would determine their pay for that day in harvesting the cranberries.
This was something you did at that time of the year, and I guess it just involved the scope of the whole family, and so there would be children as well, accompanied, of course, by the adults who were picking at the same time, some by scoop, some by snap scoop, and some by hand, depending on the strength, the age of the vines.
These were the classic cranberry scoop. It probably came in various forms, evolved into this in the early years. But when the heavy plantings of cranberries were coming in, the young vines didn't pick well with those long wooden teeth, so this snap machine or snap scoop was evolved with tiny metal teeth, and the person operating it had a thumb trap, and it was also called a trap machine as a result of that. You stuck it in the vines, shut the gate, and stripped the berries off by pulling it out. Now, this was done in a very rapid motion like this, and the cranberries stay in as you go in, and then the trap keeps them from falling out as you remove it from the vines.
We picked for years for these scoops. We used to have 10 men pick all of this bog. They'd go across these sections, one behind the other, on an echelon fashion, and they'd pick where the other man left off, the other fellow would take over. And they just had to keep on their knees all the time, just going along across the bog. It was very hard on the knees. Used to wear out clothes and pants pretty much, but they had knee pads, and they used to get blisters on your knees too lots of times, so it was pretty hard work. You couldn't get many people to do it today, I'm afraid. Not anymore, anyway.
To achieve so much hand labor, the cranberry farmer required many people to help out at harvest time. At the turn of the century, eager hands were coming to the United States from all over the world.
Our father and mother came here in 1902 from Finland. They worked in Worcester first, and then in about 1908, my father came here the first time to work on the cranberry bogs to pick.
People of Cape Verdean descent that came over worked in cranberries to some extent. Many of them came over on the boats. My grandfather came over and they would do some work, and then they'd send over for some of their relatives from the Cape Verde Islands. It was natural for a lot of them to get into it. This was an area where a lot of them had settled, and they came, and this was the work they did. A lot of it was manual tasks. That's how we got involved. My grandfather, I believe, purchased some acreage and built some bog, and that's how he learned how to do it, and it was kind of a natural progression.
Back in the 1900s, we had some insects that we still have now. Fireworm, I think, was one of the first problems that the early cranberry growers had. And they'd all get together and discuss, you know, what happened at a certain month or at a certain time, and discuss what the worm would look like that did it. And after the cussing and the swearing, I says, well, maybe we ought to learn a little more about this insect or about this weed.
Through the efforts of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, the Wareham Cranberry Experiment Station was established in 1910 by Dr. Henry J. Franklin.
The Cranberry Station was founded to assist the cranberry growers in controlling various of the natural enemies and conditions that affect cranberries, particularly control of insects, frost injury, and so on.
Dr. Franklin was an entomologist, and he sat and collected samples, observed the damage that was being done, developed the life cycles of all these different insects which are still pests today on the plants. He published his data, and the entomologists that we have working with us today read his books because nothing has changed.
For many years, flooding a bog was its only protection against frost. High-capacity lift pumps such as this were introduced in the early 1900s. This flooding protects not only the ripened berries in the fall, but also the vulnerable buds in the spring.
If the frost comes when those buds have broken dormancy, then you're going to lose the crop if they freeze. The reason you lose the crop is that the flower buds are right there in the terminal bud, and if they get frozen, they do not reform, and you do not have a crop in the fall.
Through his research at the Cranberry Experiment Station, Dr. Franklin devised formulas that could predict dangerous temperature drops. This major breakthrough was invaluable to the cranberry farmers, and a telephone warning network was established to spread word in case of an impending frost.
When Dr. Franklin developed this, telephones were in existence. That was the one new technology they had in those days. Same telephone system is used today, same formulas, same location.
One year Chet was in the Army, and Bill Foster came down to help me start the pump on a frost night, and we couldn't get it to go. And the frost came very early. It came about 9 o'clock that evening. And well, the next morning I went down to the bog, and I couldn't believe it. I had never seen the effect of a bad frost before. But the new growth was out about maybe ½ an inch, and it was all bent over and brown.
Probably the single greatest thing that we did was through Professor Norton at the experiment station, who stayed out late nights, frost nights, and ran sprinkler systems, and determined that small amounts of water continuously applied could protect the cranberry flowers and the cranberry fruits from being frosted.
We began to use it as a tool, and it became perceived as more of a universal tool. So it became natural progression to try, well, let's see if we can't apply our fertilizer with this tool. As we're spraying water on, we can put some nutrients out there. It doesn't expose a lot of people to pesticides. Only one man is dealing with it, and he's dealing with it in an isolated situation, not directly in contact with it. It's become a marvelous tool for us.
To stimulate growth, the bogs need to be resanded every few years. Spreading the sand on ice protects the vines from damage. Throughout the years, sanding has been accomplished by several different methods, some quite innovative. In the early days, however, every aspect of cranberry farming was done exclusively by hand, and the use of machinery did not really begin to make an impact until after World War I.
This machine was the first successful mechanical cranberry harvester. It was developed in the 1920s, and it was built locally in Massachusetts by the Matchison Machine Works in Quincy. This machine was considered a big breakthrough at the time. They built about 100 of them. They were used in the late 1920s until about 1952, I think the last one was used. This machine has a picking head that's described as being an active picking head. It has a series of combs that travel around in a circle and a series of cups underneath. After it's picked, the cups close and capture the cranberries. When they make the trip around the circle, when they come up, they open up once again and they drop the cranberries into a conveyor, and the conveyor runs them over into a box.
It was a step in the right direction, but the trouble with the Madison picker was it was so large, it was cumbersome to handle. You couldn't, as a contour of the bog, you know, a bog, even though you like to have as level as the floor, some of those old timers wasn't able to make it that good. You take out a big stump and the bog would be uneven. Well, that big machine couldn't adjust to the levels of the bog as they changed about. And that's why when they come along after World War II, Tom Darlington and the Western picker, these were machines that the operator had his handles on, and if he saw a dip in the vines, he automatically related to it.
When I came in the business about 1950, we were having difficulty getting enough people to do the scooping. So the only answer was to get a mechanical harvester. So that's when I started working on it.
We are what we call dry harvesting today. That means we're picking into third boxes, which will be trucked to the cannery, screened and sold as fresh fruit.
This is an old Hayden separator, cut down to small size, and so it just blows the berries out and just gets the dirt and some of the poor berries out of it.
The cranberry separator consists of 7 boards set on an angle called bounce boards. A good cranberry will bounce as a tennis ball will, and a berry not suitable to be used, is soft, will not bounce. It just goes plop. Of course, the machine doesn't take every berry. As they're bouncing, they're falling through the air. A good berry bounces and knocks a bad berry over the board, and it goes out. So you have people hand-picking to remove the final cleaning.
The industry's primary sales had historically been focused on the holiday season, thanks to the Cranberries' association with the first Thanksgiving. It was during just one of these seasons, however, that the cranberry industry suffered its only catastrophic setback. Forever since known as Black Monday, November 9th, 1959, was the day that Secretary of Health, Education and Welfare Arthur Fleming announced to the nation that eating cranberries could cause cancer.
The scare was over a chemical called aminotriazole, which had very valuable characteristics for growers in that it would kill, for instance, poison ivy without killing the vines. Poison ivy, one of the big enemies on cranberry bogs, and some of the other weeds too.
Within 30 minutes, we had 40 carloads of cranberries canceled. Never sold another cranberry the rest of that year. Sold only about half of what we grew the following year. So, you know, that was the depths. That was the lowest point.
The whole thing was an awful mix-up, but it scared the American public to such an extent that we lost our market.
An interesting part of that whole incident with Arthur Fleming, who was then Secretary of Health, Education and Welfare, was the fact that the cranberry growers did a very, very sophisticated thing. They just kept their mouths shut, and through a man named George Olson, who was then chairman of the Board of Ocean Spray, and a cranberry grower, they petitioned the Congress to investigate this imprudent action on the part of a cabinet member. They investigated Fleming's remarks, found that they were improper, and the cranberry growers were then given by the Congress $10 million, which kept a number of them alive. And I came in that environment. For some time, Ocean Spray had been selling a product called cranberry juice cocktail, but they'd been selling it only in New England. We tasted the cranberry juice cocktail and found that, understandable, very few people drank it because it was so tart. And it had actually been formulated to meet the taste of cranberry growers. And if you've seen cranberry growers, they can pick up a handful of cranberries off the vine and eat them, and that's about the way cranberry juice cocktail tasted. So we did the not-so-brilliant thing of putting more water and more sugar in it, and it then became a very palatable drink, and we initially marketed it across the country. And that really started to turn the business around.
So creative. Drink different.
I wouldn't drink cranberry juice if it was served by the most beautiful girl in the world.
What does it take to convince you you're missing out? Tomorrow, drink different. Drink Ocean Spray Cranberry Juice Cocktail.
I'm the lead man, and I come in probably 2 days before and get the pumps going, the flumes all tight, and try to get 6 to 8 inches of water above the vines, above the high spots. And then that beater will come in, and he'll start beating very much like a wheat thrasher. The berries are floating on top of the vines, and this big reel just hits the vines and snaps the berries off. I'm one of the new fellas. I didn't start till '53. They were just beginning to pick with machines. There's still a lot of scoops around. The screen houses were rough. No water picking at all. They didn't know what that was. It was started out Wisconsin and out that way first, and we thought they were crazy till we tried it, and it's turned out to be the only way to do it. It's cheaper, faster.
The dry harvest method, you leave 20–30% of the berries on the ground, especially in the early days when they're first starting with the mechanical harvesters, because the vines were trained for scooping, and the mechanical harvesters, you had to retrain the vines, and you left a lot of berries. And I just bought the bogs in the mid-1950s, and I had to pay for them, and you can't pay for them with berries that are left on the ground. And so I said, I think I'll try water harvesting. Well, if you ever want to see a revolt among the growers, you can't do that to our Massachusetts berries. No, no.
Those will go for cocktail. These are all early blacks. The center turns pink when they're really ripe, and the seeds turn brown. And they make the best color that you can get. These are the sweetest ones. That's better than a Macintosh apple.
These are late house. They're a beautiful cranberry. You can see they're uniform in size, uniform in color. For people who know about these things, they feel, if you touch them, they feel nice and hard and firm. You know they have that toughness to last in storage. And there's going to be some people out in California having these for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and they're going to really appreciate them.
Although the majority of its bogs were established many years ago, Massachusetts remains the largest producer of cranberries in the world.
This is the Nantucket cranberry bog. It's at one time it was one of the largest ones in the world. George McLaughlin is the one that made this particular cranberry bog back in the early 1900s. It was all hand labor then. There's 33 miles of hand-dug ditches here, all hand-dug. They didn't have the equipment they do today, and it was all hand-sanded with wheelbarrows and planks.
This is Wonkinko Big Bog. We're in South Carver. It's just over 75 acres. The way this thing is harvested, we've got about 6 outside pieces that have to be picked in succession and drop the water down. And then you flood the first 20 acres, which was done yesterday. Overnight, build it up another 8 inches and go all the way around, do it again. Then tomorrow he'll put another 8 inches on, and we'll go around and finish it off. Pickers will move out, and the cleanup crews will come in and take the berries.
Thanks to a widespread popularity, the variety of cranberry juice drinks catapulted the cranberry farmer to new heights of production potential.
That brought the prices up to a level where we were able to do away with antiquated equipment, some equipment 40 and 50 years old that we were nursing along simply because we couldn't afford to buy new ones. We couldn't even buy a new pickup truck. We were able to upgrade the equipment, become a little more productive with some of the technology that we had money to apply in the bog.
Well, it's an airboat, Florida, one of those Florida swamp boats. We put a water reel on it. It happened mainly because we were getting a lot of tire tracks from our water picking machinery and not getting the yields in the tire tracks. So I hoped to increase the yields and do away the tire tracks. We went into a boat. It was one of the first pieces of equipment we made that ever worked right the first time.
Yields were down considerably compared to water harvested bogs, and we realized that we had to do something different to make our dry harvest operation yield a bigger crop in order to justify staying with it and not going into water picking. It was at that time that we decided that one of the biggest impediments to a good consistent crop on dry harvested bogs was the damage that we were doing year in and year out using the buggies off and on the bogs to remove the crop. We decided we've got to get them off a better way than that. So the only real answer that I could come up with was helicopters, and September the 5th, 1978 was the first cranberry lifted by helicopter.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the 100th meeting of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association.
On August 18, 1987, the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association decided to share their 100th year anniversary with the public.
The two main purposes of the annual meeting is, officially speaking, is to elect new officers and to get the official United States Department of Agriculture crop forecast for the coming crop.
Massachusetts, your final 1986 figure was 1,813,000 barrels. Your indicated 1987 is 1,780,000 barrels.
It's an exciting day. Everybody looks forward to it. At the same time, it's the opportunity for all the leadership of the industry to report to the association members, and we make kind of a fun day out of it. But this is the first time we've ever included the general public.
Even though cranberries are grown in roughly the same medium in the different growing areas, this gives the growers a chance to get together and talk about equipment and growing and their cultural problems and what's been going on this summer and what kind of insects and weeds and the whole works. And, it's great. It's a great annual mingling. It's a real family feeling with all the other growing areas.
The cranberry growers of Massachusetts still find support regarding the growth and preservation of their industry through the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association. Although united in purpose for more than 100 years, what they enjoy the most, they will tell you, is their independence.
Well, you've got to be a little bit of everything. You got to do some plumbing, you got to do some electrical work, you got to be a carpenter. If you hired everything you wanted done, you'd be broke. You wouldn't make anything. And I think almost all the growers that I know are out there on a frost night, and they're in the water when they're water picking, and they're active in the business. There's not too many absentee owners or bosses in the office. You're into it, you're part of it.
You think, well, there's no excitement in this, wading around this swamp, etc., and things are quiet. but I get a lot of satisfaction out of it.
The fact that you're working beside ponds and listening to the frogs on a frost night, it makes it very special. There isn't another crop I know of, except maybe rice in the Orient, that uses water the way we do on cranberry bogs.
We get out of these cranberry bogs exactly what we put into it. The effort we put in are the rewards we get out on the other end, barrels per acre.
It builds a lot of character in a person, because if you make a mistake, basically, with frost or insects or something else, it's a year. You've got to live with that mistake a year, and you're not likely to make it again. And if you do make it again, you're not likely to stay in this business.
I remember when I first went to school, I hated the thought of being called a farmer. I thought that was terrible. Everybody used to kind of look down at anybody who called a farmer. That was kind of a slang term for somebody that they didn't like to. And but I tell you, right now, to me, it's a proud word to be called. I really appreciate being a farmer, and lucky that I had that opportunity all my life to because it's outdoor work, and it's really, you're working with nature all the time. You do everything with nature. You don't have to work with people. People is hard to work with. You get high blood pressure working with them, but you don't with nature, I don't think. I never did anyway.
You'd have to like it to be a cranberry grower. You'd really have to be interested. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
It's the way I want to die.